Okay folks, so I want to dive into this video to go over some accessories that you can easily 3D print or potentially buy also for your HTC Vive. Now in this video I'm going to focus primarily on the Vive stuff. There will be some kind of Oculus things kind of thrown in here and there as we go through it, but I'm going to try and dedicate a separate video for Oculus accessories that you can 3D print. For this one we're going to focus on the Vive primarily. So to start off, the Gear VR lens adapter is one of the biggest and probably most popular mods for the HTC Vive ecosystem, namely because this mod allows for a much higher sweet spot, basically the elimination of the lines on the actual lens, which also means that you're not going to be seeing God ray effect as much, because again you're not going to be using Fresnel lenses, you're going to be using more or less just like a solid kind of glass lens. Which again eliminates a lot of the issues that were present with the lenses that are stock to the HTC Vive and also the Vive Pro. Now there are some downsides to this, namely that you do have to physically take out the lenses from the previous headset that you had and then put in this adapter, as well as potentially break your Gear VR if you don't buy these separately, but it's all kind of part of the modding process. So this is just one of the lens mods. We'll get into a couple more as we go through here, but I'm going to move on to the next accessory for now. This one is actually for the 2.0 base stations, although I suppose you could use them for the 1.0 base stations as well, as they should be fairly interchangeable. The nice thing about this is that it allows you to quickly take on or off these base stations, and then you also have this little kind of nice Vive logo on there, which again, depending on the quality of your 3D printer, might look a lot better than this too. So if you have friends that come over, or some family or what have you, and you want to kind of clean up the look in your room, this is a really good kind of adapter to use for this sort of thing. And again, if you have a 3D printer at home, it just makes it that much easier for you to do so. Alright, so let's move on to the next one here. This particular one is mainly for the 1.0 base stations, but again, so long as you have the kind of base adapter, it really doesn't matter. It'll fit 2.0, 1.0. They are all pretty much the same kind of brackets, and again, this one's just another kind of variant of the one that you can use with the stock kind of system, should you choose to go that route. Now, moving on to a kind of head strap design here, which allows you to actually use a kind of different and arguably more comfortable design than what is possible with the headset by default. This one's kind of an interesting setup because it means that you can 3D print the whole thing without having to rely on somebody like Miller or Lincoln to supply the welding straps for you, which potentially they might stop producing those at some point, and at that point you won't be able to modify the headset anymore to include a comfort strap. With this mod, again, all the necessary pieces are included. Pretty much the only thing you'd really have to do is maybe add some padding in here to make this a little bit better. I have found these designs, especially the ones that use the two kind of overlapping head straps that go over the top of your head, are the most comfortable, mainly from the perspective that it's better at distributing the weight on your head. I'm really not a fan of the elastic kind of pullback straps that have been popularized by the likes of Oculus, and especially on the original HTC Vive. They squeeze the headset too much against my face, and it's just one of those things that becomes really uncomfortable. So this is probably one of the best comfort mods that you can do, and potentially, again, if you have a 3D printer, that means you also don't have to go out and buy the extra parts and pieces to make this thing work, and there's a little bit less of work to actually do to get this up and running because everything is designed to fit together. Now this one in particular is designed for the Miller welding headgear, if you decide to use that, which is what I actually ended up using for my original HTC Vive. And this one replaces the stock knob with a actual valve. This makes it more of like a Half-Life headset, but at the same time it also makes it a lot easier to adjust things on the back of your head when you do get this mounted. Again, very cool little mod, and it's just one of those things that makes your life a little bit easier and a little bit better when you decide to do the Miller welding headgear mod, which I've actually talked about on my channel before, as that's the mod that I've done. If you haven't seen that video, I'll probably put a link to it somewhere in the corner of this, so you can kind of see and do that one. Now, if, for whatever reason you don't want to actually go ahead and make this on your own, there's somebody that sells them for what I think is actually a really good price considering the labor that goes into this. Again, this is cheaper than the deluxe audio strap in a lot of cases, and in my opinion also a lot more comfortable. And as you can see, they've also kind of used the stock head strap in here for some additional comfort, and also to guide the cables as well. You don't necessarily have to do it this way, but again, it's just another one of those accessories that you can buy to make your life with the headset a lot easier. And now that, again, there's a bunch of really cool games coming out for the Vive ecosystem, games like Boneworks and Aspire 1, and with Half-Life VR kind of on the horizon, this is a great time to get into this kind of field, get yourself a OG Vive if you're on a budget, and make this strap work for you. So very useful stuff. Now, if you happen to be one of those people who is just tired of having the Vive box kind of dangle around all over the place, one of the best things that you can do is mount it on a wall, and especially if you're one of those people who uses the little kind of strap hangers that are retractable. This is another kind of win for you there, because you can just have it be right up against the wall and then lead the cable up into the retractable straps for the cable, and that way it's not potentially going to get tugged and ripped out of your computer should you trip over a cable. So very useful in that regard. I think this is one of those really nice accessories that doesn't cost that much to have printed or to print at your own house, but makes a potentially huge difference in terms of the security for your computer. Now this one is kind of an interesting design here. This one I think is primarily meant to be used in like Beat Saber or whatever other kind of sword fighting games. It basically just ties the two controllers together. These are for the original Vive ones, to make them kind of like a single saber type thing. Potentially useful if there's any games where you paddle, I suppose, but personally I haven't used this one. If it's something that interests you, however, I would highly recommend it. Again, just kind of one of those interesting off-the-cuff accessories that's available out there today, but really cool design nonetheless, and I think potentially useful for some VR games out there. Now, for those of you guys that end up using the Leap Motion instead of the inbuilt cameras for your HTC Vive, especially if you're a developer or something along those lines, they have this kind of Magic Leap holder available for the Vive Pro. I would imagine there's probably one available for the original Vive as well. If you search, Thingiverse tends to have, kind of a ton of these things available to you all the time, so very easy to actually search and find. Now here's another one that's available. This one's actually for the Index, and again allows you to use a little valve to secure the head strap at the back of your head. So if you're a huge Half-Life fan, or if you just want a little bit of an easier time to adjust the head strap on the go, very useful accessory to have there. Now, this one is a very interesting adapter because this one is for the Jackson Safety versus the Miller headgear. So it's a little bit of a different design, so therefore it requires a slightly different kind of adapter to be used. But nonetheless, this adapter also allows for much more comfort with your Vive than the stock head strap, as I see it. This one, however, does have only one piece that goes over the top of your head versus two. So the kind of force dispersion that you would see from the Miller headgear, you don't necessarily get with this one. I've seen a couple of people use these. I don't think I've actually seen anyone on YouTube with one per se, but again, it's one of those mods where depending on where you live, this might be a cheaper alternative for you versus the Miller, but again, you'd kind of have to test and see that for yourself. Now this one is kind of cool because this is a headphone adapter that you can print for your Vive. And the reason why this is pretty useful is because a lot of us end up using our own headphones on here, and of course, it's one of those things where if you're using your external headphones, having a cable dangle all over the place is extremely annoying. This just allows it to kind of stay out of the way. It allows you to have an easier connection, and it mounts right up on top of your head. So again, pretty convenient for the use of the HTC Vive. I don't think that this one's quite compatible with the Vive Pro, but nonetheless, this is something that makes your life as a developer or potentially somebody that games in VR a lot, especially if you use custom headphones, just that much easier because it eliminates some of the wire clutter that you'd normally have. Or if you typically have this connector to kind of dangle, then again, this kind of cleans up the look of the headset quite a bit. Now this one's kind of a neat little piece here. I guess it's designed primarily as kind of a haptics glove, but it connects into the little pinpoints at the back of your specific live puck. So very cool if you end up using any kind of hand tracking, or if you want to get into hand tracking but you didn't know how this would necessarily work. So you have this as a potential solution there. For those folks that like to do hand tracking and also do a camera at the same time for mixed reality type applications, this is also extremely useful. So another one of those really cool kind of 3D printable mods that you can do on the go. Now for those of you guys that are into the wireless stuff and you have a tpcast, this is another one of those really cool things where you can have this module mounted up on the ceiling somewhere. That way you are able to have it out of the way but still have good clear line of sight to your tpcast wireless module that's hanging off on your head. Very nice design, very neat, and allows the wires to be kept nice and clean. Again, this is one of those kind of quality of life improvements for VR, especially considering that the tpcast doesn't necessarily come with good mounting options out of the gate. So this is one of those things that just makes your life in VR significantly better, I think, because you don't have to try and find a tripod, or you don't have to try and mount it at some awkward angle off of your monitor. This just keeps it nice and out of the way, and at the same time you still have good line of sight. Now this one is kind of an interesting bit here. I'm not sure how many people would necessarily use this, but I guess if you have white walls in your house and you want to have a really clean look to your specific wireless base station, then this is a good way of making it look a little bit cleaner. And again, you're able to store a good length of the cable in here because they have a little wire spool for you. So depending on the distance it is away from a socket, you can kind of clean up the look of the system quite a bit. So a really nice design, and again, this is one of those things, if you're a stickler for having a clean look everywhere, this is a good option for you as far as keeping everything nice and tidy for your Vive, and potentially even the Vive Pro as well. Now, going back to the tpcast again, if you happen to be having one of these and you really want to have a clean look for the battery pack without necessarily having to have the battery pack dangling off of your back somewhere or off of your belt, you can mount it onto the back of the deluxe audio strap, which can be pretty useful. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of having an extra weight hanging off my head. I think the current VR headsets, especially if you use a wireless solution, are already kind of heavy enough. Adding an extra weight doesn't seem like it would be a good idea to me, but at the same time, it seems like it's one of those things that people can potentially really enjoy if you do want that sort of all-in-one look for the headset versus having to always strap the battery in every single time. This is one of those options for you that exists, and again, this uses kind of a nice beefy battery pack here, so you get a long playtime out of it. Now this one's more of a gunstock here, and this one actually does kind of go across multiple types of headsets, so it's not just one that it can fit. It can fit multiple, and as you can see, this one in particular looks like was designed here for the Oculus controllers, but nonetheless, they have multiple mounting options for you to be able to use a gunstock. Now, if you're wondering why you may want to use a gunstock in VR, one of the biggest things, and this is actually something that I learned from looking at a video from the guys at Stress Level Zero, which is that when you're aiming down sights in VR, a lot of these titles don't really track the position of your shoulder, and they don't align the gun with your shoulder joints when you start shooting, so you get a lot of kind of a shaky effect. And you can mitigate some of this in software, but by and large, if you're going to be playing games like Contractors, or if you're going to be playing Pavlov VR, or pretty much anything where you end up aiming a rifle in VR, typically you will want to have a more solid and stable platform to be able to use said guns, especially if you're doing sniping, because then the accuracy is paramount. Having something that stabilizes your controllers against your shoulder means that you're going to have less judder. You're going to be able to have the controllers be under significantly more kind of precise control than you would otherwise have. And of course, with something like this where it's able to fit multiple designs at the same time, it also means that you can now have the additional benefit of using multiple controllers, but at a cheap price, potentially, again, if you're able to 3D print the whole thing in your own house. extremely useful. I've done a review of the Mammut VR gunstock, which I think makes a massive difference for shooters. And again, this is one of those things that you can potentially have for pretty cheap. It's only $10 on here, and then from there, whatever the pricing would be available to you as depending on whether you have basically a 3D printer near you that you can go visit, or if you end up paying for one potentially to get this done. Nonetheless, this is one of those things that allows multiple mounting points. You can use multiple different grips because it has underslung mounting points as well. So you can use this in different various ways, which I think is a little bit more precise and a little bit more modular than a lot of these other kind of VR grips that I've seen out there before. So super useful for those of you guys that do competitive VR shooting especially. This is one of those things that, even though I haven't tried it, just based on the look and based off what you get, this seems like an ideal way to basically game in VR. Now, on the cheaper side of things, if you happen to have a Nerf gun and you have your Vive original ones and you still want to have a gun stock that's kind of budget friendly, this is another good way to do it. As you can see, they kind of break this thing apart very easily. There's a couple of different sections that you introduce into this, and then from there you basically got yourself a nice a nice little gun stock that is easy to break apart, easy to stow away somewhere if you don't have a whole lot of space, and again, very cheap, very easy to print parts that aren't necessarily going to set you back nearly as much as the other one would that we just saw, mainly because, again, you're only printing a couple of small pieces here, and from there on, you just kind of supply the rest of the parts. So very straightforward, and I think this design is pretty cool, again, because you can also slide the Vive wand up and down on this, which is pretty neat. It's a really cool design. So again, you're able to have that adjustability in addition to the fact that the stock here actually moves in and out as well. So you can kind of, make this thing into a sniper rifle, into, a marksman type rifle, or you can just use it as a kind of SMG, depending on where you've selected the shoulder stock to be and where the front kind of Vive wand happens to be at the time. So again, if you're trying to get into gun stocks and competitive shooting in VR on a budget, this is a great way to go. Now, those of you guys that do kind of mixed reality stuff in VR, or you happen to be a streamer who needs to have a virtual camera placed in the virtual world, this is one of the easiest and possibly best ways to do this, especially if you don't want to buy another kind of Vive tracker or Vive puck. I think that this is a great solution. I'm not sure what exact camera it's using. I guess it's designed for this iBuffalo camera here. But nonetheless, it's a really cool way to get into making mixed reality videos for your channel. Also, if you're shooting promotional videos that happen to use 3D scenes, this is another good way to do it. Again, using the Vive ecosystem for tracking, because it's really kind of a superior system, I think, to pretty much everything else out there right now. And this makes it that much easier for you to start making those videos, because you just 3D print this little piece and pretty much you're off to the races. You can use this thing with things like Mixcast, or there's another app that I'm blanking on the name of right now that allows you to basically record with a virtual camera by being in the world with you, and then you can reposition the camera however you want in that world to record from different angles. So potentially you can have some really cool shots of you from a third-person perspective in VR, watching from kind of a second camera versus just having that first-person perspective all the time. Now, this one is kind of an interesting one here. This allows the cable to get clipped onto the back of your Vive, deluxe audio strap, so potentially, eliminating the cable kind of just dangling around and getting in the way. This one allows you to just have it kind of go off the back. So potentially, useful if you want to run the cable up to the ceiling or just down onto the floor, depending on how you want to do that one. But again, very, very useful feature here, despite being a very small part. Now, this one is another kind of eVolv head strap file here. If we go back, I always forget exactly where I ended up putting this thing. I constantly have too many tabs open pretty much all the time, so I don't even know if we'll be able to actually kind of find it here really quickly. But yeah, so it might take me a little while. But anyway, the point is, this is the eVolv head strap that we took a look at earlier, and this particular head strap allows for a halo type design on your HTC Vive. So again, making the comfort just that much better. I think I might have actually put it further on into one of my tabs, so we'll take a look at it again when we ultimately come to that piece. But this one's split into kind of multiple different parts, so this potentially means that you can do this more piecemeal versus just having it in, I believe, like 3 or 4 parts that the original was made in. So that means that it's cheaper to print, and you can kind of break this apart into multiple payments if you decide to go that route.